She grabbed his sleeve and whispered, "Please pretend you're my dad," just as the man hunting her stepped out of the shadows. The hunter froze the moment he realized who she had chosen. Vincent Castellano, the Shadow King of Chicago, the last person on earth anyone would run to for help. And the moment Vincent looked down at her, he knew this pretense would cost blood. He just didn't know whose yet. It was a Thursday evening in the kind of alley most people pretend doesn't exist. Narrow, suffocating, wedged between abandoned warehouses on Chicago's south side. Trash bags rotted against graffiti-covered brick walls. Rainwater pooled in the cracked concrete like dark mirrors reflecting nothing but despair. A single neon sign flickered overhead, painting everything in a sickly green glow. The air reeked of wet garbage, rust, and something metallic that always came before violence. This was where deals were whispered and people vanished without a trace. Vincent Castellano stood near the mouth of the alley, checking his Rolex with the patience of a predator. Routine collection. Nothing he hadn't done 1,000 times before. He was dressed impeccably despite the rain. A tailored black suit that cost more than most people earned in 6 months. His collar hung open, revealing dark tattoos crawling up his neck like shadows permanently etched into skin. His black hair was slicked back, his face carved with sharp angles that might have been handsome if they weren't so terrifyingly cold. At 6'3", he filled the space around him with an authority that needed no introduction. Vincent Castellano didn't announce himself. His reputation screamed for him. 15 years building a criminal empire had taught him that silence was more powerful than threats, and reputation more deadly than any weapon. He controlled the ports, the casinos, the protection rackets across half of Chicago. Politicians answered his calls. Police looked the other way. Rivals simply disappeared. He was feared. He was untouchable. He was the monster mothers warned their children about. But then he heard it. Small footsteps, running, desperate, uneven, splashing through puddles like a heartbeat racing toward death. Vincent's instincts sharpened instantly. His hand moved toward the gun, concealed beneath his jacket. 20 years in this world had taught him to recognize real fear. And this wasn't someone running late. This was someone running from something. He turned just as she appeared. A little girl, no more than 6 years old, burst around the corner, looking over her shoulder with terror painted across her face. Her light brown hair hung in 2 messy ponytails, bouncing as she ran. Her small body wrapped in a floral dress now soaked through and stained with dirt. Her green eyes were wide with a panic no child should ever know, and clutched against her chest was a teddy bear, brown, worn, missing one eye, just like her innocence was about to be, because a little girl asked him to pretend. And Vincent Castellano was about to discover that some pretenses become the most dangerous truths of all. If this satisfies you, hit the like button, share this story with your friends, and subscribe to never miss another video. Now, let's get back to the story. She did not hesitate. Not for a single second. She ran straight toward him as if he were the last refuge left in this world. Her small feet slipped on the wet concrete, yet those green eyes never once left his face. And then she was there. Tiny fingers clutched the sleeve of his suit jacket, gripping so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She pressed herself against his leg, her whole body trembling like a leaf in a storm. An old, worn teddy bear crushed between her fragile frame and his thigh. Then she looked up, tears filling her eyes as she stared straight into his, and in a shaking whisper begged him to pretend to be her father, begged him not to let them take her away. Vincent Castellano froze completely. In 36 years of life, 15 years spent building a criminal empire, he had heard every kind of plea imaginable, begging for mercy, begging for more time to repay debts, begging him not to kill their families. He had listened to once powerful men kneel at his feet and plead for leniency. He had watched the hardest men break down and cry like children when faced with death, but never, not once in his life, had anyone looked into his eyes and asked him to protect them. No one had ever run toward him seeking safety. He was Vincent Castellano. He was the darkness people fled from, not the place they ran to. He was a nightmare, not a dream. He was death, not life. Mothers pulled their children to the other side of the street when they saw him. Adults lowered their heads to avoid his gaze. Grown men trembled when they heard his name. Yet this child, a 6-year-old girl with tangled brown hair and a dirt-stained floral dress, ran straight into him, as if he were a guardian angel. She did not look at him with the fear he had known for so many years. She looked at him with trust. Pure, absolute, without a trace of doubt. It was the gaze of a child who believed that adults would keep her safe. It was a gaze Vincent had not seen since his mother died more than 20 years ago. Something cracked inside his chest. A small fracture in the stone wall he had built over countless years. His hand, A hand that had strangled enemies, that had pulled a trigger without hesitation, that had signed death sentences without a tremor, now lifted of its own accord and rested gently on the girl's wet hair. He did not understand why he did it. His body moved before his mind could catch up. She trembled beneath his touch, but not because she feared him. She was shaking from cold, from exhaustion, from the terror of whatever had happened before she found him. And in that moment, in the foul-smelling dark alley beneath flickering green neon light, Vincent Castellano felt something he believed had died long ago. The instinct to protect, not territory, not money or power, but a small life that had placed its entire trust in him. He lowered himself, dropping to one knee on the wet concrete, indifferent to the expensive suit soaking up dirty water. His face came level with hers. He looked into those green eyes filled with tears and fear, and in a low voice he had not used with anyone since his mother was alive, he told her to stay right here, that no one was allowed to touch her anymore. Footsteps echoed from the far end of the alley, slow, deliberate, the sound of leather shoes striking wet concrete like a countdown to something inevitable. Vincent did not need to turn around to know someone was coming. 15 years in the underworld had honed his instincts sharper than any blade, and he sensed danger as naturally as his own breath. The little girl in his arms shrank against him, her small fingers clutching his suit jacket even tighter, her body shaking violently now, no longer from cold or exhaustion but from pure terror. Vincent rose slowly, guiding her behind him, then turned around. A man stepped out of the shadows at the end of the alley, about 35 years old, average in every way, not tall, not short, not thin, not heavy, with neatly trimmed brown hair slicked back, a clean-shaven face, dark slacks, a white buttoned shirt, and a gray jacket. He looked like an office worker heading home after a long day, like a father going to pick up his child, like the kind of neighbor you nod to every morning without a second thought. Ordinary, too ordinary, ordinary to the point of danger. This was the kind of man who could walk past a playground, sit in a cafe, stand in line at a supermarket without raising a single suspicion, the kind parents would never warn their children about, the kind children would trust when he said he was taking them to their mother. But Vincent saw what others did not. He saw the eyes scanning the alley with cold calculation, the eyes of a predator searching for prey, and when those eyes landed on the little girl hiding behind Vincent, something flickered within them, greed, hunger, and something darker that Vincent refused to name. Then the gaze lifted to Vincent's face, revealed in full beneath the flickering green neon light, the hard square jaw, the steel-gray eyes, the tattoos creeping above his collar, and the look that anyone in Chicago's underworld recognized instantly. Recognition hit like a punch. The hunter froze mid-step, the fake smile on his lips withering instantly, the blood draining from his face so fast Vincent could almost see it happen. He forced out 2 words as if someone were choking him. Castellano. The name hung in the damp air between them. Heavy, lethal, like a death sentence already passed. He knew who Vincent was. Of course he did. Anyone who moved in the shadows of Chicago knew that name, knew never to touch anything that belonged to the man who carried it, knew how those who crossed Vincent Castellano had disappeared. Vincent felt the small fingers gripping the back of his jacket, then the girl's whisper, so soft only he could hear, telling him that the man was not her father, that he said he would take her to her mother, that when she tried to run he grabbed her arm and it hurt so much that her babysitter tried to stop him and he pushed her down, that she did not get up again and there was blood coming from her head. Each word fell into Vincent's mind like drops of acid. Something ignited in his chest, not the familiar anger he felt when someone dared to oppose him, but something more primal, darker, more dangerous, the fury of something he believed had died long ago. Vincent looked at the man before him, at the neat clothes, at the terrifyingly normal face, at the eyes calculating whether to run or attempt an explanation, and he saw every other child the man had deceived, every promise to take you to your mother, every small arm wrenched tight, every babysitter left lying still. Vincent smiled, and that smile was more frightening than any threat. The hunter swallowed hard. Vincent could see his Adam's apple bob, could smell the fear beginning to seep from his body, mingling with cheap cologne and cold sweat. He tried to steady himself, tried to force a smile, but the smile trembled at the corners of his mouth and never reached the eyes now naked with panic. He raised both hands in a placating gesture, palms facing Vincent as if that might soothe the beast standing before him. He opened his mouth, his voice attempting calm but breaking at the ends of its syllables, saying there had been a misunderstanding, that the child was his niece, that she had wandered off while they were shopping, that he was only trying to take her back to her mother. His words drifted past Vincent like a passing breeze, meaningless, hollow, rotten like the trash piled along the alley wall. Vincent stood unmoving, 6 feet 3 inches of muscle and pure danger forming an impenetrable wall between the girl and the man trying to deceive him. He did not need to move. His presence alone was enough to thicken the air in the alley until it felt solid, enough to make the falling rain seem to slow, enough to force the man opposite him to struggle every second not to collapse to his knees. The man kept talking, kept explaining, kept weaving lies in the smooth tone of someone accustomed to manipulation. He said the child had a vivid imagination, that she frightened easily for no reason, that her mother would worry if he did not bring her home soon, that this was truly just a misunderstanding, and he did not wish to trouble someone like Mr. Castellano over a trivial family matter. Vincent let him talk, let each lie fall onto the concrete like drops of dirty water. Then, when the man stopped and waited for Vincent to nod and step aside, Vincent finally spoke. One word, just a single word. No. It rang through the alley like a death knell, low, final, absolute, leaving nothing to argue and nothing to negotiate. The hunter blinked once, then again, as if he could not believe what he had heard, as if no one had ever said no to him in this way. He tried to smile, but the sound that came out was closer to a choke than a laugh. He stammered that Mr. Castellano did not understand, that the girl really was his niece, that he could prove it, that he could call his sister right now. Vincent did not move. His steel-gray eyes never left the man's face for even a fraction of a second. He had seen too many liars in his life not to recognize desperation clinging to its last thin lifelines. And this man was desperate. The air between them grew suffocating. The rain kept falling, the neon light kept flickering, but time itself seemed to stop. Vincent saw the moment the decision was made, saw desperation turn into recklessness in the man's eyes, saw the hand begin to move toward the edge of his jacket. Slow at first, then faster. He drew a gun, or tried to, because Vincent moved before the barrel ever cleared the holster. He moved with a speed that did not match his size, 6 feet 3 inches of a body honed by 15 years of violence surging forward like a ghost. One hand clamped down on the wrist holding the gun, the other struck the elbow from the opposite direction, and the sharp crack of breaking bone split the alley, cutting through the man's scream. The gun clattered to the wet concrete. He collapsed to his knees, his free hand clutching the shattered wrist, his face twisted in agony, his groans echoing between the brick walls. Vincent stood over him, tall and terrifying, like death itself stepping out of the shadows. He said nothing. He did not need to. His silence was more frightening than 1,000 threats. Behind him, the girl still clung to the hem of his suit jacket. But now there was something else in her green eyes besides fear, something that looked like safety, like the belief that this man would never let anyone hurt her. Vincent picked up the gun, removed the magazine, and tossed both aside, then turned back to the man writhing at his feet, and when he spoke, his voice was colder than the rain falling around them, telling him that now he would tell the truth. All of it, and that if Vincent heard one more lie, a broken wrist would not be the only thing shattered that night. He confessed. Of course he did. No one could remain silent with Vincent Castellano standing in front of them, eyes promising fates worse than death. Vincent grabbed him by the collar and slammed him back against the damp brick wall. The broken wrist hung uselessly at his side, swollen and bruised beneath the neon light. He whimpered, tears and mucus mixing with sweat on his ashen face. He was no longer the confident predator who had emerged from the shadows. He was nothing more than a cornered animal, shaking and desperate. Vincent asked who he worked for. His voice was calm, as if asking about the weather, and it was that calm that made it terrifying. The man stammered that he could not say, that they would kill him. Vincent tightened his grip, pressing him harder into the wall until bits of brick crumbled onto his shoulders, telling him he should be more worried about what Vincent would do right now than what they might do later. And then he broke, piece by piece, like a dam that could no longer hold the pressure. The confession poured out of him like floodwater. He said he was just a low-level errand man, just a collector, that there were dozens like him scattered across the city. There was a network, huge, highly organized, operating for years. He did not know who was at the top. No one at his level did. But that person had power, real power, the kind that made police look the other way and judges stay silent. He was paid $5,000 for every child delivered successfully. $5,000. Vincent felt his stomach knot. $5,000 for a life. $5,000 for a stolen future. $5,000 for innocence crushed. He asked how many children he had delivered. The man fell silent, trying to avoid Vincent's gaze. Vincent asked again, his voice now like steel grinding against stone. The man swallowed and whispered, "More than 20 in the past year." More than 20. The world seemed to tilt around Vincent for a moment. More than 20 children. More than 20 little ones like the girl clinging to his back. More than 20 pairs of eyes once full of life, now swallowed by darkness. He looked down at the man before him, and for the first time in many years, Vincent Castellano had to restrain himself from killing someone on the spot. His fingers trembled, not with fear, but with a rage demanding release. This man was a small fish. Killing him now would change nothing. Keeping him alive, he could lead to bigger ones. Vincent released him. The man slid down the wall and collapsed onto the wet concrete, shaking uncontrollably. Vincent pulled his phone from his inner pocket and dialed a number he knew by heart. Enzo answered on the first ring, his voice as calm and steady as ever, asking what was wrong. Vincent told him to come immediately to the alley behind the old warehouse in the Southern District, to bring 2 trusted men. Enzo did not ask why. He never did, and that was why he had been Vincent's right hand for 15 years. He said 10 minutes and hung up. Vincent turned back to the man huddled at his feet and told him he would live tonight, not because Vincent wanted him alive, but because he was still useful. He would confess everything he knew, every name, every location, every detail, no matter how small. And if Vincent discovered he had held anything back, he would make sure his death lasted many days. The man nodded frantically, like a puppet on strings, swearing he would tell everything, all of it. Vincent did not respond. The oaths of this kind of man meant nothing, but fear did, and this man was so afraid he could barely breathe. Vincent turned to the little girl still clinging to him. Her green eyes were wide, having witnessed everything that had just happened. For a fleeting moment, Vincent hesitated. She had seen what he was capable of, the violence he could unleash, the true monster inside him. But when he looked into her eyes, he saw no revulsion or terror. He saw something else, something like gratitude, as if she understood that sometimes it takes a monster to defeat another monster. Headlights swept across the mouth of the alley. Enzo had arrived. Enzo stepped out of the black SUV with 2 men dressed in dark clothing. He was tall and lean, salt and pepper hair slicked back, the weathered face of a man who had seen too much darkness in his life. His eyes swept over the scene, from the man groaning on the ground to the little girl clinging to Vincent's leg, and he asked no questions. 15 years at Vincent's side had taught him that sometimes silence was the best answer. Vincent gave short orders, telling Enzo to keep the man alive, to force him to confess everything he knew about the network, every name, every location, and not to let him die before he finished talking. Enzo nodded, signaled the other 2 men to haul the criminal to his feet and drag him toward the vehicle, then paused, looking at the girl, looking at Vincent, and for the first time in many years, something like curiosity flickered in his eyes. But he did not ask. He only nodded again and turned away. Vincent watched the SUV disappear into the rain, then he bent down. The girl was still clinging to his leg, her whole body trembling, her lips bluish from the cold. He asked if she could walk. She shook her head weakly, her small legs no longer strong enough to hold her up. Vincent did not hesitate. He leaned down and lifted her into his arms, one hand supporting her back, the other under her knees. She was so light it made his chest ache, light as a leaf, light as if the wind could carry her away at any moment. She did not resist. Instead, she wrapped her arms around his neck and pressed her face into his shoulder, the old teddy bear crushed between them. Vincent walked toward the black Maybach parked at the mouth of the alley, opened the rear door, and gently placed her onto the cream-colored leather seat. The car's luxurious interior formed a painful contrast with the sight of the dirty, rain-soaked child. Vincent removed his suit jacket, the expensive fabric now stained with rainwater and alley grime, and wrapped it around her. The jacket swallowed her whole, leaving only her small face visible, green eyes watching him closely. He slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, then looked at her through the rearview mirror and asked her name. Her voice was small and hoarse from too much crying. Lily. She said her name was Lily. Vincent nodded and asked where her mother was. Lily said her mother worked at the hospital, St. Mary's Hospital, that her mother was a nurse and had a night shift tonight, so the babysitter had picked Lily up from school. Her voice began to tremble when she mentioned the babysitter. She said the babysitter's name was Amanda, that Amanda was very kind and often baked cookies for Lily. But today, when Amanda was walking Lily home, that man stopped them. He said he would take Lily to her mother, said her mother had been in an accident at the hospital. Amanda did not believe him and tried to pull Lily away, but he chased them and pushed Amanda down. Lily paused, her eyes filling with tears, saying Amanda hit her head on the steps, that there was blood, so much blood, and that Amanda did not get up again. Lily tried to run, but the man grabbed her arm. It hurt so much, but Lily bit his hand and managed to escape. She kept running and running until she found him. Vincent's hands tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. The babysitter, Amanda, might be dead. Dead for trying to protect a child who was not her own. Dead for standing up to evil. He would send someone to check. If she was alive, he would make sure she received the best care possible. If she was dead, he would make sure her family never had to worry about anything again, and the one responsible would pay. He asked Lily about her father. She was silent for a moment, then said her father was in heaven, that he had died 3 years ago in a car accident, and now it was just Lily and her mother, just the two of them. 3 years. She was only 6 years old, which meant she had lost her father when she was barely 3, perhaps too young to remember his face clearly. Vincent drove on in silence, streetlights sliding past the windows like blurred streaks of light, until Lily's voice came softly from the back seat, hesitant, asking if he was a bad man. Vincent looked at her through the mirror, those green eyes studying him not with fear but with the pure curiosity of a child trying to understand the world. He was silent for a long time, then answered honestly, saying that maybe he was a bad man, that he had done many bad things in his life, but tonight, for her, he would be a good man. Lily hugged her teddy bear tightly to her chest and said that she believed him, and that simple sentence, from a 6-year-old child, cracked yet another piece of the stone wall Vincent had built around his heart over so many years. St. Mary's Hospital rose through the rain like a fortress of light in the middle of the dark night. Vincent parked directly in front of the emergency entrance, ignoring the no parking signs and the looks from security. He stepped out of the car, opened the rear door, and gently lifted Lily into his arms. She had fallen asleep during the drive, exhausted from fear and crying, but when she felt herself being moved, she opened her eyes and wrapped her arms around his neck, whispering to ask if this was her mother's hospital. Vincent nodded and told her yes, she would see her mother soon. He walked through the automatic glass doors and into the emergency lobby with the child in his arms, and the world around them seemed to freeze. A man 6 feet 3 inches tall, dressed in a black shirt with the collar open to reveal tattoos, his face cold as ice, carrying a dirty child wrapped in an expensive jacket. Every gaze in the lobby turned toward them. Nurses stopped typing. Patients stopped complaining. A security guard placed a hand on his radio, but did not press the button. Vincent recognized the fear in their eyes. He was used to it. His entire life, people had looked at him that way. But tonight, he did not care. He walked straight to the reception desk, where a young nurse struggled to remain calm, her lips trembling, and said he needed to see Nurse Sarah Harrison, that she worked here, that this was her daughter. The nurse stammered that she would call immediately and lifted the phone with shaking hands. Vincent waited, his back straight, his eyes scanning the lobby with the vigilance of a man who had lived too long in danger. Lily clung to his neck, her face pressed into his shoulder, as if being in his arms made her safe from everything in the world. Then he heard it. Hurried footsteps, the sharp click of nursing shoes on tile, the sound of someone running with the desperation of a mother. A woman burst through the staff doors, her white coat fluttering, brown hair tied in a ponytail swinging behind her, her face pale with worry, her eyes sweeping the room in raw fear, until she saw her little girl in the arms of a stranger. Sarah. It had to be Sarah. She had the same eyes as Lily, bright emerald green, now overflowing with tears. She ran to them, caring about nothing else, not about the frightening man in front of her, only about her child. Lily heard her mother's voice, lifted her head, and broke into sobs, calling out to her. Sarah cried too, pulling Lily from Vincent's arms and crushing her against her chest, as if afraid that letting go would make her disappear, kissing her hair, her forehead, her cheeks, repeating that she was here, that Lily was safe, that Mommy was here. Vincent stepped back and watched the reunion in silence. Something twisted painfully in his chest as he witnessed it. Something he believed had died long ago. He remembered his own mother, remembered the feeling of being held in her arms, remembered a sense of safety he had never known again after she was gone. Then Sarah looked up. For the first time, she truly saw Vincent, the hard angles of his face, the tattoos creeping up from his collar, the steel-gray eyes watching her, and recognition struck. Vincent saw it in her gaze, the instant she realized who he was, Vincent Castellano, a name everyone in Chicago knew, a name synonymous with danger, crime, and things better left unspoken in the dark. Fear flashed in her eyes, instinct urging her to clutch her child and run as far away from him as possible. But then she looked down at Lily, at the expensive jacket wrapped around her daughter, at the way Lily showed no fear of the man standing before them, and she swallowed her fear. She straightened, still holding Lily tightly, and met Vincent's eyes, thanking him, her voice trembling but sincere. saying she did not know what had happened, but she thanked him for bringing her daughter home. Vincent watched her in silence. Watched the strength in her tear-filled eyes, the way she stood tall despite her fear, the tired lines around the eyes of a single mother working night shifts to support her child, exhausted but unbroken, resilient like a small candle, refusing to go out in a storm. And for the first time in many years, Vincent Castellano looked at a woman not with indifference or calculation, but with respect. Vincent said that he needed to speak with her privately. His voice neither a request nor a command, simply a statement weighted with certainty and impossible to refuse. Sarah looked at him, then down at Lily nestled securely in her arms, the child's eyes already fluttering closed from exhaustion, and she nodded, leading Vincent to a small staff break room at the end of the corridor. The room was cramped, furnished with an old sofa, a small table, and a coffee machine, the cold white glow of fluorescent lights washing everything in a tired, pallid hue. Sarah laid Lily down on the sofa, where the child curled into Vincent's jacket and slipped almost instantly into sleep, then turned to face the man filling the doorway. She crossed her arms over her chest, a defensive gesture she likely did not realize she was making, and asked what had happened to her daughter. Vincent told her everything, from beginning to end, leaving nothing out and softening nothing, telling her about the dark alley, about Lily running to him and clutching his sleeve, about the hunter emerging from the shadows, about what the man had said and what Vincent had done to him, about the confession, about the more than 20 children taken over the past year, about the network, about the powerful figure at its center. Sarah listened, and with every sentence her face grew a little paler, her hands beginning to tremble, her knees seeming to lose the strength to hold her upright until she had to brace herself against the wall. When Vincent reached the part about the babysitter Amanda, about how she might have died trying to protect Lily, Sarah broke down, not with the panicked sobbing of fear from earlier but with the silent collapse of grief, tears streaming down her face without sound. Vincent waited for a moment, then spoke, his voice cutting through her grief with quiet certainty. "She is alive. My men found her before the ambulance did. She is in stable condition at a private clinic, and I have taken care of all her medical expenses. She will recover." Sarah looked up, a flicker of relief crossing her tear-stained face, though the fear remained. She stammered through her sobs, asking why Lily, saying her daughter was just an ordinary child, that they had nothing, that she was only a nurse living in a small apartment in a working-class neighborhood, asking why anyone would want to take her child. Vincent answered in a low, even voice, saying that was precisely why. Ordinary children from ordinary families in ordinary neighborhoods, because when they disappeared there was no one with enough power to search for them. No billionaire hiring private investigators, no politician pressuring the police, no journalist digging for answers. Only numbers in missing children files that slowly faded into obscurity. Sarah slid down the wall and collapsed onto the floor, burying her face in her hands as her shoulders shook, whispering through her fingers that she could not protect her child, that she was a mother who could not protect her child, that if Lily had not escaped, if Lily had not found him, then by now her daughter would have. And she could not finish the sentence, could not bring herself to say the words. Vincent looked at the woman breaking apart in front of him, at her thin, trembling shoulders, at her brown hair slipping loose from its tie, at the wrinkled nurse's uniform after a long shift, and he saw himself in her, saw helplessness, saw the terror of failing to protect the one you loved, saw the darkness threatening to swallow everything. He did not know why he did it, did not know why the words left his mouth, but he said, his voice filling the small room, that he would protect her and Lily. Sarah looked up at him, eyes red and disbelieving, and asked why, her voice hoarse, asking why he would help them, saying she knew who he was, that everyone in this city knew who Vincent Castellano was, that he was not the kind of man who saved people, that he was the kind of man people needed saving from. Vincent was silent for a long time, then answered honestly, saying he did not know why, perhaps because the child had looked at him as if he could save her, perhaps because no one had ever looked at him that way, perhaps because he had seen too much darkness, and this time wanted to do something different, saying he did not ask her to trust him, only to let him keep her and Lily safe until he found and destroyed the network. Sarah looked at him, then at her sleeping daughter on the sofa, then back at him, doubt still in her eyes, fear still there, but also the recognition of a brutal truth, that she had no other choice, that she was only a nurse with no money, no power, no one to turn to, that the police could take weeks to investigate if they bothered at all, and in the meantime those behind it could return at any moment. She nodded slowly, heavily, as if signing a contract she was not sure she fully understood, saying she would let him help, but she needed one promise, that if at any point she felt her daughter was not safe with him, he would walk away. Vincent nodded and said he promised. And in that moment, inside the small break room under cold fluorescent light, a strange pact was formed between a crime lord and a single mother. That very night, Vincent called Enzo and gave brief orders, telling him to use every resource, every connection, every channel available to dig into the human trafficking network, to find out who was at the top, who was involved, where the money flowed, and where the children were taken, saying he wanted everything. Enzo was silent for a moment on the other end of the line, then asked if his boss was certain about this, warning that it could involve people with immense power and ignite a war they had not anticipated. Vincent replied with a single sentence, saying he was certain, then ended the call. He arranged for Sarah and Lily to move into a secure apartment he owned in the northern part of the city, a high-floor unit in a building with 24-hour security, cameras covering every angle, and his men guarding it day and night. Sarah reluctantly agreed to take leave from the hospital, worried about money and her job, but Vincent told her not to concern herself with those things, that he would handle everything. She looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and caution, as if still trying to understand why a crime lord would help her and her child. 3 days passed. 3 long days Vincent spent mostly in his office, waiting, thinking, and trying not to think about the green eyes that had looked at him with absolute trust in that dark alley. Then Enzo arrived, stepping into Vincent's office with a thick file folder in his hands, his weathered face darker than usual. He set the folder on the desk, looked at Vincent, and said this was what they had found, and that it was worse than they had thought, far worse. Vincent opened the folder, and with every page he turned, the fury inside him flared a little higher. The network had been operating for at least 10 years, 10 years hiding in the shadows, 10 years devouring innocent children, 10 years without anyone discovering it or daring to speak. More than 200 children reported missing during that time were linked to the network. More than 200. The number dancing before Vincent's eyes like a blood-soaked indictment. More than 200 families destroyed. More than 200 futures stolen. More than 200 young eyes swallowed by darkness. And Lily had nearly become number 201. Vincent kept turning pages, the list of those involved, so long it forced him to draw a deep breath. Not because of the quantity, but because of the names. 5 judges, people meant to uphold justice selling children instead. 12 police officers from low ranks to high, those sworn to protect the public looking the other way or actively participating in the crime. 3 state legislators, people meant to represent the voices of citizens silencing anyone who dared speak out. And at the top of this pyramid of corruption, one name circled in red ink, Judge Harold Pemberton. Vincent knew the name. Everyone in Chicago did. A federal judge, 60 years old, white-haired, with the kindly face of a gentle grandfather, famous for speeches about protecting children and family rights, a recipient of annual humanitarian awards, a media darling held up as a symbol of justice and morality, and the man at the head of the largest child trafficking network in Chicago. A bitter taste rose in Vincent's throat. 15 years in the underworld, he thought he had seen enough human rot, thought nothing could still disgust him, but this hypocrisy surpassed every boundary he had known. Enzo continued his report, his voice low and steady like a eulogy, saying the money was laundered through a web of shell companies. The children moved out of the city by land and water routes, some sold to overseas rings, others disappearing into domestic underground operations, that Pemberton was protected on both sides, criminal and political, and anyone who dared touch him ran into trouble or vanished. Vincent closed the folder, his grip tightening until his knuckles turned white, and asked if there was information on international partners. Enzo nodded and said yes, and that this was where things became far more complicated. The Volkov family, the Russian Mafia, they were the network's international transport partners. Vincent closed his eyes. Volkov. The name carried a history soaked in blood. If Pemberton was the brain, then Volkov was the claws, and Vincent had just declared war on both. Enzo continued speaking about the Volkov family, his voice dropping as if merely uttering the name carried danger with it, saying that Volkov was no ordinary organization, that they were Russian Mafia with a history spanning more than 50 years, originating in Moscow and spreading across the world like a cancer, that Alexei Volkov, the current boss, was known by the nickname The Butcher for the way he dealt with traitors, that he controlled transatlantic routes for everything from people to weapons to drugs, and now, clearly, children as well, warning that if they moved against this network they would not only be fighting Pemberton and the corrupt officials within the government, but the Volkov family too, And that was a war even the Castellano Empire might not survive. Vincent did not reply. He stood by the window, looking out over the city of Chicago sinking into the night, its flickering lights like fallen stars, his mind drifting far from the room, far from the present, sinking into a memory he had tried to bury for 26 years. He was 10 years old, standing in the corner of the kitchen in a small suburban house outside Chicago, his body curled in on itself behind an old refrigerator, his mother's screams ringing in his ears, tangled with his father's growling voice. His mother had discovered it, discovered what his father was doing, the missing children, the transactions carried out in the dark, and she had threatened to go to the police, to expose everything. Vincent remembered perfectly the look on her face when she turned to him one last time. Eyes filled with tears and fear, but also with love, telling him to run, to hide, to not look back. But he could not run. His legs were nailed to the floor. He could only stand there, watching his father move toward his mother, watching the large hand close around her throat, watching the light in her eyes fade and finally go out. He did not scream. He did not cry. He did nothing. He stood there frozen and helpless, while the only woman who had ever loved him was killed right in front of him. After that night, his father did not send him away, did not kill him to silence him. Instead, he kept him and turned him into a tool, teaching him how to use a knife before he knew how to shave, teaching him how to fire a gun before he was allowed to drive, teaching him how to kill before he knew how to love, molding him from a frightened child into a killing machine, from a boy who had lost his mother into a monster without a heart. And when his father died, a bullet through the head in a settling of scores, Vincent inherited everything, the empire, the power, and the darkness, and he continued what his father had built because it was all he knew, because he had nothing else, because the 10-year-old child in that kitchen corner had died with his mother. Vincent blinked and returned to the present, his hand gripping the window frame so tightly it nearly bent the metal. He thought of Lily, of the green eyes filled with terror as she ran into the alley, of the way she had clutched his sleeve with absolute trust, of her trembling voice begging him to pretend to be her father. She was like him, painfully like him, a child pulled into the darkness of the adult world without a choice, a child who should have been protected instead of forced to protect herself, a child who could be crushed by the cruelty of those who treated human lives as commodities. But there was one difference. That night, 26 years ago, no one had protected him. No one had stood between him and the darkness. No one had saved him from becoming the tool of the man who had murdered his mother. He had been helpless, completely and utterly helpless. But now it was different. Now he had power, resources, an army, everything that 10-year-old boy had lacked. And this time he would not stand by and watch. This time he would not be helpless. This time he would become the thing he had wished someone would have been for him when he was a child. A protector. Vincent turned back to Enzo, his gray eyes burning with something Enzo had never seen in the 15 years he had stood beside him. Not the cold anger he knew so well, not the calculating mind of a criminal businessman, but a fire, the fire of a man who had found a reason to fight. Vincent said they would destroy the network, whether it meant facing Pemberton, Volkov, or hell itself, and that he did not care what the cost would be. The following night, Vincent summoned all of his highest-ranking lieutenants. More than 30 men gathered inside the secret warehouse at the Eastern Docks, the same place where 15 years earlier Vincent had formally declared himself the head of the Castellano Empire. They stood in rows within the vast space, industrial lights casting harsh beams over weathered faces that had seen far too much violence. These were his most loyal men, men who had shed blood for him, killed for him, and been willing to die for him. But tonight, Vincent would ask something entirely different of them. He stepped onto the wooden platform at the far end of the warehouse, Enzo standing at his right side like a faithful shadow. Vincent looked down at the waiting faces, at the probing eyes. They knew something major was unfolding. Vincent never called them together like this unless it was serious. He began to speak, his voice echoing through the cavernous space, telling them about the human trafficking network, about more than 200 children who had vanished over the past 10 years, about Pemberton and the corruption woven through the government, about the Volkov family, and about his decision to destroy all of it. Silence swallowed the warehouse when he finished. Then murmurs rose, spreading from one man to another like ripples across water. A tall man stepped forward, Marco, head of operations in the Western District, and one of the most senior among them. He cleared his throat and asked if the boss was certain. If they moved against Pemberton, they would lose the judicial protection they had spent years cultivating. If they moved against Volkov, they would ignite a war that could burn everything they had built to the ground. They would lose money, allies, everything. Several others nodded in agreement, the murmurs growing louder. A younger man stepped forward next, his face tight with resentment, saying they were criminals, not heroes, that saving the world was not their job, that they had profits to protect and territory to defend, and asking why they should risk their lives for children who had nothing to do with them. Vincent let them speak, letting each objection fall and dissolve into the air. When silence returned, he stepped down from the platform and walked straight up to the young man. They stood face to face, less than a step apart. Vincent was nearly a head taller, but it was not his height that made the man shrink back. It was his eyes, steel gray and piercing, looking through him as if he were made of glass. Vincent spoke slowly, each word falling heavy as stone, saying he was not asking anyone to be a hero, that he was simply stating what he would do. Anyone who wanted to follow him was welcome. Anyone who wanted to leave was free to go. But anyone who stood in his way, no matter who they were, would become his enemy, and everyone in that room knew what happened to the enemies of Vincent Castellano. The young man swallowed and stepped back, then lowered his head. No one else spoke. No one left. Vincent turned to face the crowd and said this was their only chance to walk away without judgment or punishment, that he would not force anyone to stay if they did not want to fight this war. The silence stretched. Then Enzo stepped forward, his voice ringing out as he said he stood with his boss, as he had for 15 years, as he always had. Marco followed, then another man, then another, one by one declaring their loyalty, not out of fear, but because deep down they all knew there were lines that should never be crossed, and selling children was one of them. The next day, Vincent did something no one expected. He initiated contact with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Agent Diana Chen, head of the Human Trafficking Unit, nearly dropped her phone when she heard his voice. She was a hard woman in her 40s, short black hair, eyes sharp as blades, someone who had spent her entire career trying to put men like Vincent behind bars, and now he was calling her, offering cooperation. She asked if this was some kind of joke. Vincent replied that he never joked. He said he had information on the largest child trafficking network in Chicago, names, locations, evidence, and that he was willing to share it with the Bureau. Diana Chen was silent for a long moment, then asked what he wanted in return. Vincent said he wanted nothing, only that the network be destroyed. Whether by his hand or by the law, he did not care, as long as it was destroyed. Suspicion still colored Diana Chen's voice when she agreed to meet, but she agreed nonetheless, because even if she did not trust Vincent Castellano, she could not ignore the chance to dismantle a human trafficking ring that had operated for more than 10 years right under her nose. The war had officially begun. A week passed after the night Vincent declared war on the human trafficking network. A week filled with secret meetings with Diana Chen, plans drawn up in the shadows, information exchanged through channels no one would ever suspect. Vincent barely slept, his mind constantly churning with strategy and calculation, but that afternoon he chose to do something different. He went to visit Lily and Sarah. The safe apartment sat on the 20th floor of an upscale building overlooking Lake Michigan, a place Vincent had chosen carefully, far enough from the network's territory and secure enough to block any threat. 2 of his men guarded the lobby, 2 more stood watch in the hallway, and no one could approach without passing them. He knocked, and small footsteps sounded from inside, quick and eager. The door opened, and before Vincent could react, a tiny body threw itself against his leg. Lily. She wrapped her arms tightly around him, looking up with the brightest smile he had ever seen, calling out that Uncle Vincent had come, saying she missed him so much. Vincent stood frozen for a moment. No one had ever welcomed him like this. No one had ever been happy to see him. People feared him, lowered their heads, avoided him, but Lily clung to him as if he were the most important person in the world, as if his arrival were the best part of her day. He bent down, awkwardly resting one hand on her head, and said he missed her too, his voice rougher than usual. Lily grabbed his hand and pulled him inside the apartment with the excitement of a 6-year-old eager to show something special. She told him he had to see it, that she had drawn it for him, that she had been working on it all week. Sarah stood in the kitchen, pouring water into a kettle. She looked at him as he entered and nodded in greeting. She looked better than she had that night at the hospital. At least she had managed a few hours of sleep, though dark circles still shadowed her eyes. Vincent nodded back and let Lily drag him toward a small table by the window. On it lay a sheet of white paper covered in crayon scribbles. Lily picked it up and handed it to him, her eyes shining, saying this was him and this was her, and he was protecting her from the bad people. Vincent took the drawing, and the world around him seemed to stop. It was a picture drawn in crayons by a 6-year-old. Nothing complex or refined, just simple lines and uneven bright colors, but its meaning struck his chest like a blow. A tall man with dark hair, dressed in black, stood in the center of the page. In front of him was a small girl with brown hair and a flowered dress. The man had his arms spread wide, forming a wall between the girl and the ugly black shapes in the corner of the picture. And on the man's face, drawn with the still unsteady hand of a child, was a smile. Vincent stared at the drawing, his chest tightening until it was hard to breathe. This was how she saw him, as a protector, as a good man. He, Vincent Castellano, who had killed more people than he could count, who had caused more suffering than he wanted to admit, who was the very embodiment of darkness in this city, and she had drawn him smiling, shielding her from evil. Lily looked at him anxiously and asked if he did not like it, saying she could draw it again if he wanted. Vincent knelt down, set the drawing aside, and looked into her eyes, telling her it was the most beautiful picture he had ever received and that he would keep it forever. Lily's smile spread wide as she threw her arms around his neck, and this time Vincent hugged her back. His arms that had strangled enemies and fired guns without hesitation, now holding her small body with a gentleness he did not know he still possessed. From the kitchen, Sarah watched the scene, her eyes filled with a complex mix of emotions. Gratitude that this man had saved her daughter, fear of who he was, and how dangerous his world could be, and something else she did not dare name, as she watched the way he held Lily, and saw the rare softness on that cold, hard face. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, bathing them in warm golden light, and in that moment the small apartment no longer felt like a hiding place from danger. It felt like a family. 3 days after the warm afternoon with Lily's drawing, Vincent stood in the darkness outside an abandoned warehouse in the western industrial district of the city. Intelligence from Diana Chen identified this place as one of the network's transfer points, where children were held before being moved elsewhere. 15 of Vincent's men surrounded the building, all dressed in black, fully armed, all prepared for bloodshed. Enzo stood beside him, checking his weapon one last time, quietly asking if they were sure the Federal Bureau of Investigation would not arrive and arrest them all. Vincent replied that Chen had agreed to give them 30 minutes before her team moved in, enough time to do what needed to be done. The clock struck midnight. Vincent gave the signal. The steel door was blown apart with explosives, and they poured in like a black flood. Gunfire erupted instantly. The guards inside reacted faster than Vincent had expected, already prepared for an assault. Bullets tore through the air, metal clanged, screams echoed, bodies groaned. Vincent moved like a ghost through the chaos, the weapon in his hands roaring with lethal precision. 2 men fell before they even realized where he was. Another tried to raise his gun from behind him, and Enzo dropped him before he could pull the trigger. The firefight lasted nearly 10 minutes. 10 minutes of pure violence, of blood and gunpowder, of life and death separated by a breath. When the final shot faded, 7 guards lay motionless on the warehouse floor. 3 of Vincent's men were wounded, but none were dead. Vincent stepped over the bodies, guns still ready, his eyes sweeping the dark space, and then he saw them. In the far corner of the warehouse, hidden behind stacks of cargo, stood a row of metal cages. 12 cages. 12 children. They huddled inside, enclosures meant for animals, eyes wide in the darkness, trembling from fear and the echoes of gunfire. Children between 5 and 10 years old, boys and girls alike, all filthy, underfed, their hollow eyes belonging to lives stripped of hope. Vincent froze at the sight. Rage surged through him so violently he could barely breathe, his grip tightening on the gun until the metal bit into his skin. He had seen brutality, committed brutality, but this, children caged like livestock waiting for slaughter, crossed every boundary of revulsion. He moved forward, shooting the locks off each cage one by one. The children shrank back as he approached, too terrified to believe they were being rescued. Vincent knelt before a small girl, the youngest of them, perhaps Lily's age, and spoke softly, his voice gentler than his men had ever heard, telling them it was over now, that no one would hurt them again, that they were safe. Enzo called Diana Chen and relayed the location and situation. The Bureau would arrive within 20 minutes to take custody of the children and secure the scene. Vincent stepped outside, needing air, needing distance from what he had seen. But before he reached the door, one of the guards groaned on the floor. He was still alive, a bullet through his shoulder. Vincent approached and stood over him, looking down with the eyes of death. The man begged for his life, saying he was just paid labor, that he had a family. Vincent ignored the pleas and asked about Pemberton. The man stammered that Pemberton never came to places like this, that he was too important and dealt only through intermediaries. But there was an upcoming meeting, a meeting with the Russians he had overheard, scheduled to take place in 2 weeks at a suburban estate. Vincent stored the information, then walked away, leaving the man alive for the authorities. That night, when Diana Chen arrived and took custody of the children, she looked at Vincent differently, no longer with pure suspicion, but with something close to acknowledgement. 12 children had been saved, the first victory, but Vincent knew it was only the beginning. Pemberton was still out there, Volkov was still out there, and the real war had only just begun. News of the raid spread through the underworld like wildfire. 12 children rescued, 7 guards eliminated, a major transfer point destroyed, and the name Vincent Castellano whispered everywhere like a curse upon those behind the network. Pemberton received the news the following morning while seated in his luxurious office at the federal courthouse. The black judge's robe still draped over his shoulders, the kindly smile still offered to colleagues, but inside him rage was boiling. 15 years spent building the network. 15 years of careful concealment, 15 years without anyone daring to touch it, and now some mafia boss had the audacity to challenge him. Pemberton reached for his phone and dialed a number he rarely used, and on the other end a voice cold and deep as Siberia answered, "Alexei Volkov." Pemberton spoke briefly, saying they had a problem, that Vincent Castellano was causing trouble and needed to be dealt with. Volkov was silent for a moment, then replied that he had heard about the incident, that he would send people to Chicago, and that Castellano would regret choosing the wrong enemy. 3 days later, Volkov's men arrived, not ordinary thugs but professional assassins, meticulously trained, men who treated killing as a career. They carried a simple message: $3 million for the head of Vincent Castellano, alive or dead. $3 million. The bounty spread across Chicago within hours. Every criminal, every opportunist, every freelance killer knew. And $3 million was enough to make many people gamble with their lives. But that was not the worst of it. The worst came on the 5th night after the raid, when 2 of Vincent's warehouses at the eastern docks went up in flames at the same time, the fire raging through the night, staining the Chicago sky red like blood. By the time firefighters arrived, there was nothing left to save. Millions of dollars in goods reduced to ash. But it was not the money that made Vincent grind his teeth when he received the news. It was the 3 men who had followed him for years, who had remained loyal through countless storms, found in the ruins of the warehouses, not killed by fire but shot before the flames were set, executed as a warning. Enzo brought the news to Vincent at 3 a.m, his face dark as a sky before a storm, saying it was Volkov. No one else worked with this level of brutality, and they were sending a message. Vincent stood by the window of his penthouse, looking out over the city swallowed by darkness, the distant glow of the fires still lingering on the horizon. 3 of his men with families, with wives and children waiting at home, now lying in a morgue because of him, because of the war he had started. Enzo asked quietly what they should do next, saying some people were beginning to worry. $3 million was a powerful temptation, and someone inside could be swayed. Vincent turned around, his gray eyes cold as steel tempered by fire, and said to double the pay for everyone who stayed, that the families of the 3 men who had died would be cared for life, and to spread the message that anyone who betrayed him would not only die but die slowly. Enzo nodded, but he did not leave, asking instead if Vincent wanted to stop, saying they had saved 12 children, done more than anyone else ever had, that perhaps it was enough. Vincent thought of Lily's drawing, of the tall man protecting the little girl, thought of the more than 200 children who had vanished over 10 years without anyone saving them, thought of the 10-year-old boy he had once been, standing helplessly while his mother was murdered before his eyes, unable to do anything. He answered no, they would not stop. If Pemberton and Volkov wanted war, then they would have war, and he would make sure they regretted ever existing. Enzo looked at his boss, saw the fire of resolve burning in those gray eyes, and knew nothing could change this decision, because in 15 years beside Vincent, he had never seen him like this, not the cold anger of a crime lord defending territory, but something deeper, more primal. The fury of a man who had finally found something worth fighting for beyond himself. The underground war had officially begun, and Vincent Castellano had no intention of retreating even an inch. The traitor was one of the guards assigned to the building where Sarah and Lily were hiding. His name was Danny, 28 years old, with only 3 years in the organization. He was not a bad man, at least that was what he told himself when he answered a call from an unknown number, and heard the offer of $300,000. $300,000 just to provide an address. He had a wife 7 months pregnant, crushing bank debt, and dreams of a better life. He convinced himself it was only information, that he was not personally harming anyone. And so he talked. The address, the floor, the number of guards, the shift schedules, everything. That night, Vincent was sitting in his office, reviewing reports on Volkov's operations in Chicago. The clock was nearing midnight. Enzo had gone home. Most of the men were resting, but Vincent could not sleep. Something gnawed at his chest, an unease he could not explain. His eyes drifted to Lily's drawing on his desk, the picture of a tall man protecting a small girl, and suddenly the unease sharpened into fear, sharp as a blade. Without thinking, Vincent grabbed his car keys and ran. He drove like a madman through the empty streets of Chicago, blowing through red lights, tearing through intersections without slowing. A trip that normally took 15 minutes, he cut down to 7. When he reached the building, his heart dropped. The 2 guards in the lobby lay motionless on the marble floor, blood spreading beneath their bodies. Vincent drew his gun and sprinted for the stairwell, refusing to use the elevator for fear of an ambush. 20 floors. He ran as if his own life depended on it. When he reached the 20th floor, the apartment door had been blown open. Lily's screams tore through the night from inside. Vincent charged in without hesitation. 4 men dressed in black were inside the apartment. One had Sarah restrained, a hand clamped over her mouth, a knife pressed to her throat. Another was moving toward Lily, who was curled into a corner clutching her teddy bear, screaming for her mother. The remaining 2 swung their guns toward Vincent the moment he appeared. Everything happened in an instant. Vincent fired before they could pull the trigger. 2 shots. 2 men fell. The third released Sarah and reached for his weapon, but Vincent was already on him, kicking the gun away and driving a punch into his throat that dropped him gasping to the floor. The 4th man, the one advancing on Lily, turned and fired. The bullet tore through Vincent's shoulder. He felt the heat, the ripping pain, warm blood spilling down his arm. But he did not stop. He could not stop. He fired back. 1 shot, straight into the man's chest. The attacker collapsed, his gun skidding across the floor. The apartment fell into sudden silence after the storm of violence, broken only by Lily's sobs and Vincent's ragged breathing. He moved to the corner where Lily was curled up and dropped to his knees in front of her. Blood dripped from his shoulder onto the floor, but he did not care. All he saw were the green eyes overflowing with tears and terror. He spoke gently, his voice shaking with pain but steadying for her, telling her it was all right now, that he was here, that she was safe. Lily threw herself into his arms, sobbing uncontrollably, her small hands clutching his shirt as if letting go would make him vanish. Sarah rushed over and collapsed beside them, wrapping her arms around both Vincent and Lily, trembling violently, tears streaming down her face, her mouth repeating, thank you, over and over. Vincent held them with his uninjured arm, blood still flowing from his shoulder, pain spreading through his body. But in that moment he felt no pain at all. He felt only relief. He had arrived in time. They were alive, and he would never let anyone lay a hand on them again, even if it cost him his life. Lily finally fell asleep after nearly 1 hour of uninterrupted crying, and Sarah laid her daughter down on the bed in the bedroom of the temporary apartment Vincent's people had quickly arranged, another safe place whose address only Enzo and Vincent knew, tucking the blanket around her, kissing her forehead, and standing there, watching her sleep for a long while, as her own hands continued to tremble. When she returned to the living room, Vincent was sitting on the sofa, one hand pressed against his wounded shoulder, blood seeping through the gaps between his fingers, his face paler than usual, yet his gray eyes still sharp, still alert, still sweeping the room as if searching for the next threat. Sarah fetched the first aid kit she had asked Vincent's men to prepare, sat down beside him, set it on the table, and looked at his shoulder, telling him he needed to go to the hospital, that the bullet could still be inside. Vincent shook his head, saying the bullet had gone straight through, that he had checked, that bandaging would be enough, that he could not go to a hospital. Too many questions, too many risks. Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to say he needed proper medical care, that she was only a nurse and not a surgeon. But she looked into his eyes and understood that arguing was pointless, so instead she sighed and gently pulled his shirt down off the injured shoulder, her hand trembling as it touched his skin. She told herself it was because the shock had not yet passed, because she was still frightened by what had just happened. But deep down she knew that was not the only reason. His skin was warm beneath her fingertips, taut over muscles hardened by years of violence, tattoos spreading from his neck down over his shoulder and chest, telling stories she did not understand but knew were dark. The gunshot wound was raw and red, blood still oozing, but just as he had said, the bullet had passed through with nothing lodged inside. She cleaned the wound with alcohol, and Vincent did not flinch, even though she knew it had to hurt terribly, sitting there motionless, watching her work with eyes she did not dare meet. She bandaged the wound in silence, her fingers moving with the practiced ease of long experience. And when she wrapped the final layer, she looked up and their eyes met. His gray eyes, usually cold as steel, held something else now, something softer, something she had never seen in him before. She asked, her voice lower than she intended, why he had risked his life like that, saying he could have died tonight, that he knew that. So why? Vincent was silent for a long time, long enough that she thought he would not answer, thought he would say it was what had to be done or that it was his responsibility. The cold, distant answers she had come to expect from him, but instead he told the truth. He said he could not explain it, that he had lived 36 years without caring about anyone but himself, that he had done terrible things, that he had been the kind of man mothers warned their children to stay away from, that he believed he was no longer capable of feeling anything. But then that night, in the dark alley, when Lily grabbed his sleeve and begged him to pretend to be her father, something had changed. He did not know what it was, only that from that moment on he could not turn away, could not watch the girl and her mother be harmed and do nothing, could not continue living as if he had no heart. Sarah looked at him, at the hard, angular face now revealing vulnerability for the first time, at the gray eyes searching hers for something, perhaps understanding, perhaps forgiveness for what he had been. She placed her hand over his, her small hand resting on his scarred, calloused one, warmth touching cold, light touching darkness, and said that no one chose where they were born, no one chose the family they were given, no one chose what happened to them as children, but all of us could choose who we became, and what he was doing now, what he had done to protect her daughter, showed that he was choosing to become a better man. Vincent looked at her hand on his, at the warmth he did not deserve yet desperately longed for, and in that small room, in the quiet of the late night, something began to take root between them, something neither of them dared to name, but both of them felt, deep and undeniable. The following morning, Vincent identified the traitor. It was not difficult once he knew exactly who had access to the safe apartment. Danny was dragged before him in an abandoned warehouse, his hands bound behind his back, his face pale with terror, sobbing and begging, talking about his pregnant wife, about the debt crushing him, about how he had not known they would kill anyone. Vincent listened in silence, gray eyes cold as ice, then asked a single question, asking who had contacted him, how, and what they had said. Danny confessed everything, the unknown number, the offer of $300,000, the information he had given. And then he revealed one more thing he had overheard during the call, something the men on the other end had let slip, a meeting. Pemberton and Volkov were going to meet face-to-face within 10 days, at a private estate in the northern suburbs, to discuss expansion, how to deal with Vincent, and the future of the network. This was the opportunity, the chance to cut off the head of the snake, once and for all. Vincent signaled Enzo to take Danny away. He would not be killed, not out of forgiveness, but because he was still useful, to be held until everything was over, and then handed to the Federal Bureau of Investigation as a witness. His wife told only that he had to leave town for work, the only mercy Vincent would grant the man who had nearly caused Lily and Sarah to be murdered. That afternoon, Vincent took Sarah and Lily out of Chicago, not to another apartment in the city, but to a secluded estate deep in rural Wisconsin, more than 3 hours away, a place Vincent had purchased years earlier under a false name, with no ties to the Castellano Empire. A place even Enzo had not known existed until that day. They drove in a black sport utility vehicle, Vincent behind the wheel, Sarah in the passenger seat, Lily asleep in the back clutching her teddy bear. The scenery shifted from Chicago's skyscrapers to endless green fields, afternoon sunlight pouring through the windows, gentle and warm, as if the outside world knew nothing of the darkness they were fleeing. But Vincent, his senses dulled by the throbbing pain in his shoulder and the exhaustion of the past days, made a fatal mistake. He did not check the undercarriage of the SUV before leaving. He did not see the tiny, military-grade tracker pulsing silently beneath the chassis, broadcasting their location to a predator waiting in the shadows. Sarah remained silent for the first hour, staring out the window with distant eyes. Then she turned to Vincent, studying the hard lines of his face as he focused on the road, and quietly asked if he had a family, if anyone was waiting for him at home. Vincent did not answer right away, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. Then he said no, that he had no one, that his father had died when he was 21 and his mother when he was 10. Sarah asked softly how his mother had died, and Vincent told her. He did not know why he did. Perhaps exhaustion from too many sleepless nights, perhaps the ache still pulsing in his shoulder, perhaps because her hand on his the night before had cracked something in the wall he had built around himself. He told her about that night, about the small house in the suburbs, about his mother's screams, about his father's hand closing around her throat, about the 10-year-old boy frozen in the corner of the kitchen, too frightened to scream, too powerless to do anything, about how his father turned him into a tool afterward, teaching him how to kill instead of how to love, about how he became the very thing he despised because he had no other choice. Sarah listened in silence, tears running down her cheeks unchecked, and she looked at Vincent, and for the first time she did not see Vincent Castellano, the notorious crime lord of Chicago. She saw a 10-year-old child swallowed by darkness, a child who never had the chance to grow up normally, to be loved normally, to live normally, a child wounded to the core, and hiding that wound behind cruelty and coldness. She reached out and placed her hand on his arm, resting on the steering wheel, saying nothing, needing to say nothing, because the touch itself was enough. Vincent felt the warmth of her hand seep into his skin, into his blood, into a heart he believed had died long ago, and in that moment, for the first time in 26 years, he did not feel completely alone. 10 days later, Vincent led the raid on the estate where Pemberton and Volkov were meeting, on a moonless night when darkness draped the suburbs like a black shroud, with 20 of Vincent's men encircling the mansion from every direction. In coordination with Diana Chen's team positioned on the outer perimeter, the plan meticulously calculated so that Vincent would spearhead the entry, secure those inside, and leave the remainder to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The assault was swift and brutal, the front doors blown apart, gunfire cracking through the night as Pemberton's and Volkov's guards resisted fiercely, though they were no match for a force prepared to the last detail, and Vincent moved through the chaos like a lethal specter, dropping anyone who blocked his path. The wound on his shoulder not yet healed but unable to slow him, because nothing could slow him tonight. Pemberton was found trying to flee through a rear exit, his expensive suit rumpled, the false benevolence on his face twisted by fear, and Vincent seized him by the collar, slammed him into the wall, and stared into the eyes of the man who had caused the suffering of hundreds of children, as Pemberton begged and promised money, endless money, any price, only for Vincent to answer with a cold smile and shove him toward Diana Chen as she advanced. The Bureau took Pemberton immediately, cuffed him, and read him his Miranda rights while he babbled meaningless defenses. But there was a problem. Alexei Volkov was not there. His representative at the meeting, a high-ranking lieutenant, had escaped through a hidden tunnel before the raid began. Someone had warned them, not early enough to save Pemberton, but enough for Volkov to slip the trap, and Vincent ground his teeth at the news, consoling himself that at least the head of the network was in custody. Pemberton was taken to Federal Bureau of Investigation headquarters and began talking that very night, giving up every name, every location, every transaction, every secret he had hidden for 15 years, confessing in exchange for leniency he knew would not spare him from spending the rest of his life in prison. And within 48 hours, 50 arrests followed across Chicago and neighboring states. Judges, police officers, legislators, businessmen, all dragged into the light like worms unearthed from the soil. The trafficking network Pemberton had built over more than a decade collapsing like a sandcastle before the tide. Diana Chen called Vincent with the results, her voice carrying, for the first time, a measure of genuine respect, and Vincent received the call at the Wisconsin estate with Sarah and Lily, feeling a brief lightness as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Lily asked to sit on the back porch to draw the sunset. Vincent checked the perimeter through the glass, endless empty fields, and nodded, watching her settle on the wooden steps just a few feet away, Sarah making tea in the kitchen, and for a fleeting moment everything seemed peaceful. Then his phone rang again from an unknown number. Vincent answered, and his world shattered as a voice cold as Siberian ice spoke on the other end. Alexei Volkov, speaking slowly, each word falling like a bullet, saying Castellano, "I have something that belongs to you." And then another voice sounded, a child's voice, Lily's voice, trembling and sobbing, calling Uncle Vincent, and Vincent's heart stopped for a moment as his blood turned to ice, and Vincent's eyes shot to the glass door. The porch was empty. The sketchbook lay abandoned on the steps, the crayons scattered, and the back door standing wide open. Volkov continued, his tone thick with pleasure, saying he wanted Vincent to surrender, alone, unarmed, within 24 hours, or the girl would disappear like the hundreds of children Pemberton's network had swallowed. And then the line went dead. Vincent stood there with the phone still pressed to his ear, his body rigid as stone, as Sarah ran in from the kitchen asking what was wrong and why his face was so pale. Then saw the empty room, the open door, the terrible truth in Vincent's eyes, and understood. Her scream tearing through the quiet estate as she rushed him and pounded her fists against his chest again and again. demanding to know what he had promised, that he had promised to protect her daughter, promised no one could touch Lily. So where was her child now? Where was she? And Vincent let her strike him. Every blow deserved. Because he had failed, had let Lily be taken under his own roof, had not protected her as he had sworn. When Sarah finally collapsed, exhausted, into his arms, sobbing like a child, Vincent held her as if she were the only thing keeping him upright and spoke, his voice low and unyielding like steel tempered by fire, saying he would bring Lily back, even if it cost his life. Even if he had to burn the world to ash, he would bring the girl home to her mother, and he swore it. Vincent did not wait the full 24 hours. He had no intention of surrendering, and he certainly had no intention of leaving Lily in Volkov's hands for even one more minute. Within 6 hours of the call, he had mobilized every resource he possessed, every man, every weapon, every connection, every favor owed to him over 15 years. Diana Chen provided intelligence on where Volkov was likely hiding, a fortified estate in the eastern suburbs, guarded like a military stronghold. Enzo stood before Vincent in the staging warehouse, more than 30 men around them checking weapons and gear. And as Enzo looked at his boss, at the fire burning in those gray eyes, he knew many would not return tonight. He asked if Vincent was certain, saying this was a suicide mission, that Volkov had at least 50 gunmen inside the estate. Vincent replied that he was not asking anyone to come with him, that anyone who wanted to stay behind could do so, but that he would go even if alone. Enzo nodded slowly, then turned to the men and asked who was willing to follow their boss. And one by one every hand rose, not a single man stepping back. They departed at midnight, a convoy of black vehicles gliding through empty streets like ghosts toward Volkov's estate. Vincent in the front seat, silent, eyes fixed on the darkness ahead, his mind holding only one image, Lily, her green eyes filled with tears, her trembling voice calling his name over the phone, the one-eyed teddy bear she never let go of. He would bring her back, even if he had to walk through hell. The Volkov estate loomed in the night like a massive sleeping beast. High walls, cameras everywhere, guards patrolling on rigid schedules. But Vincent had studied it. He knew its weaknesses, he knew how to get in, and he knew Volkov was waiting for him, just not expecting him so soon, and not expecting him to arrive with an army. The attack began with an explosion at the main gate, chaos erupting instantly as gunfire cracked like deadly fireworks and tore through the quiet night. Vincent's men pouring in from multiple directions, overwhelming the guards with numbers and the resolve of men who no longer feared death. The firefight raged across the courtyard, through corridors, into room after room. Blood spilled, bodies fell, screams and groans blending with relentless gunfire, and Vincent moved through the chaos like death incarnate, not taking cover, not slowing, advancing with his weapon roaring in his hands. Bullets grazed him. One tore through his calf, another lodged in his side, but he did not stop. The pain shoved deep into his mind and replaced by something stronger, the fury of a man fighting for something more important than his own life. He found Volkov on the top floor, in a large room with glass windows overlooking gardens burning below, and in the corner, bound to a chair, was Lily. She saw him and her green eyes flared with light through tears, trying to call his name but silenced by tape over her mouth. Volkov stood in the center of the room, a gun in his hand, a cold smile on his lips, tall, gray-haired, with the hardened face of a man who had killed more people than he could remember, speaking slowly, praising Vincent as brave or foolish, saying he had not decided which, but that he would enjoy killing him regardless. They fired at the same time, Volkov's bullet ripping through Vincent's shoulder, straight through the old wound not yet healed, Vincent's shot striking Volkov's gun hand and sending the weapon flying, and then they collided, a brutal hand-to-hand fight between two men for whom violence was as natural as breathing. Volkov was stronger than Vincent had expected, his blows landing like sledgehammers, and Vincent had lost too much blood, his injured leg slowing him, the fight crashing through the room, into walls, rolling across the floor, each man fighting for advantage. One punch from Volkov sent Vincent down, his vision blurring as blood loss closed in. And Volkov laughed, saying Vincent had lost, saying he would sell the girl to the highest bidder after killing him. And those words ignited something inside Vincent, something primal and unstoppable, as he saw Lily watching him from the chair, green eyes full of tears but still holding hope, still believing he would save her, just as she had believed on that first night in the dark alley. Vincent roared and lunged with the last of his strength, Volkov too slow to react, Vincent slamming him into the wall, hands closing around his throat and not releasing until the light left his eyes completely, and when Volkov stopped breathing, Vincent let him go, the body sliding to the floor like a sack of trash. Then he turned to Lily, staggering toward her and leaving a long trail of blood across the wooden floor, untying her, tearing the tape from her mouth. And Lily threw herself into his arms, sobbing, clutching his neck as if afraid he would disappear, crying that she knew he would come, that she knew he would save her, that she was not afraid because she knew he would come. Vincent held her so tightly he did not know whether he was shaking or she was, his blood soaking into her clothes, as he whispered that he was here now, that she was safe, that he would never let anyone hurt her again. And for the first time in 36 years, Vincent Castellano cried. Vincent sank into darkness, a deep darkness without dreams or memories, only endless emptiness, hovering between life and death for 3 days while his body fought catastrophic injuries and his mind drifted somewhere far away. The doctors saying he had lost too much blood, saying the wound to his side had nearly pierced his lung, saying it was nothing short of a miracle that he was still alive. But Vincent heard none of it, because in those days, there was only one thing that pierced the fog of unconsciousness. A small hand gripping his hand, warm, patient, never letting go, and when he opened his eyes on the 4th day, the first thing he saw was Lily, sitting on the chair beside his hospital bed, her head resting against the mattress, one hand tightly holding his, the other clutching her old teddy bear, asleep in that position, brown hair falling across her face, her breathing slow and peaceful, while Sarah sat in the corner of the room, eyes red from exhaustion and too many tears, and when she saw Vincent wake, she sprang to her feet and rushed to his side, tears spilling again as she whispered his name, asking if he could hear her, begging him never to scare her like that again. And Vincent tried to smile, his lips cracked and his throat burning, but he still forced the words out, asking if Lily was all right, and Sarah cried and laughed at the same time, saying the child was fine, that she had refused to leave his side since he was brought to the hospital, insisting she had to hold Uncle Vincent's hand so he would not go away. And Lily woke at the sound of their voices, her green eyes opening to see Vincent looking at her, and she burst into tears, not from fear or pain but from overwhelming relief, climbing onto the bed and clinging to him, refusing to let go for more than an hour, while Diana Chen visited that afternoon with news of the aftermath of the war, telling them the trafficking network had been completely dismantled, that 80 people had been arrested nationwide, including the most powerful figures named by Pemberton, that 50 children had been rescued from other holding sites and were receiving care and would soon be reunited with their families. The largest anti-trafficking operation in the state's history, and Diana looked at Vincent differently now, no longer with suspicion or disdain but with respect, saying she never thought she would thank a man like him, but what he had done had saved more lives than she could imagine. And 3 months passed as Vincent slowly recovered, the wounds on his body fading into scars, while the wounds in his soul were healed by other things, by Lily's laughter each morning, by Sarah's smile each evening, by the feeling of belonging somewhere and to someone for the first time in 36 years, and Lily's 7th birthday was celebrated in Vincent's penthouse, now adorned with children's drawings on the walls and toys scattered across the floor. Sarah and Lily having moved in a month earlier in a decision all three knew was right, even if none of them said it aloud, and Vincent gave Lily a new teddy bear, brown, soft, and with both eyes intact, and she opened the box, looked at the bear, then up at him with shining eyes, hugged the new bear, and then hugged the old one with the missing eye, saying she would keep both, because the old bear was the friend who stayed with her when she was afraid, and the new bear was the friend Daddy Vincent gave her. The words, Daddy Vincent, hanging in the air as Sarah held her breath and Vincent froze, and Lily tilted her head and asked if she could call him Dad, because he had protected her like a father, saved her like a father, and she wanted him to be her father. And Vincent knelt to her level, looked into the green eyes that had trusted him absolutely since that first night in the dark alley, and nodded with his voice breaking, telling her she could call him Dad, and Lily squealed with joy and threw her arms around him, while Sarah stood beside them with tears streaming down her face and the brightest smile she had ever worn. And that night, after Lily had fallen asleep, Vincent stood on the balcony, looking out over Chicago, as Sarah joined him and rested her head on his shoulder, his arm circling her waist and drawing her close as they stood in silence, watching the city lights flicker below, until Lily ran out and hugged both their legs, proudly holding up a new drawing of 3 figures, a tall, dark-haired man, a brown-haired woman, and a little girl standing between them, with 2 simple words written beneath in a child's unsteady hand, "My family." And Vincent looked at the picture, and then at Sarah and Lily, and understood that on that night in the dark alley, when a small girl had grabbed his sleeve and begged him to pretend to be her father, He had no idea his life would change forever, that pretending long enough could become the truth, that he would find something he never believed he deserved: a family. Because sometimes the best things come from the most unexpected places. Sometimes light can be found in the deepest darkness, and sometimes a 6-year-old girl with a one-eyed teddy bear can redeem a lost soul. And this story reminds us that no one is born evil, and it is never too late to change. That love, especially the pure love of a child, has the power to heal the deepest wounds. That family is not only those bound by blood, but those who choose to stand together, protect one another, and love without condition. And if this story touched your heart, please like and share this video with those you love. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss the emotional stories we share each day. We would love to hear how you felt about Vincent and Lily's story, and whether it reminded you of someone in your own life, whether you believe people can truly change. So, please share your thoughts in the comments below. We read and cherish every message from the heart, and we wish all of you watching good health, peace, and happiness every day. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. Goodbye, and we look forward to seeing you again in the next video.